March 18th, of course, is the birthday of our esteemed ancestor, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. I believe this would be 85 years that we're celebrating the legacy of this dynamic, seminal scholar, really. And part of what we'll be talking about tonight revolves around the thoughts that were presented to us by Dr. Welsing and the esteemed elder Neely Fuller. I titled the third cycle of white supremacy in America because it seems that in this massive struggle for clarity versus confusion, a lot of our people are not really understanding, why things have uh, devolved to this particular point, in our struggle here in the bastion of imperialism, the United States of America. And people understand to a certain extent, what is called slavery, which I think we should always formally call chattel slavery, because there were many forms of slavery throughout history, but nothing like chattel slavery. So we should be very specific. And people understand the era of segregation that most people call Jim Crow. I call it American apartheid. So I just want to talk about that just for a bit. But before we start, I just wanted to go through a couple of definitions that we have from our scholars. The first definition of white supremacy being from Dr. Welsing. She says racism and white supremacy is the local, global power system and dynamic structured and maintained by people who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined, which consists of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, actions, and emotional response as conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity, including economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, for the ultimate purpose of white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation on the planet Earth. Now, that's from Dr. Welsing. The next definition comes from Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, who actually was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And Dr. Martinez says white supremacy is the historically based, institutionally perpetuated system of exploitation and oppression of continents, nations, and peoples of color by white peoples in the nations of the European continent for the purpose of maintaining and defending a system of wealth, power, and privilege. The most common mistake people make when they talk about racism is to think of it as a collection of prejudice and individual acts of discrimination. They do not see that it is a system, a web of interlocking, reinforcing institutions, economic, military, legal, educational, religious, and culture. As a system, racism affects every aspect of life in the country. And by not seeing that racism is systemic, part of a system, people often personalize or individualize racist acts. For example, they will reduce racist police behavior to a few bad apples who need to be removed rather than seeing that it exists in police departments all over the country and is basic to the society. This mistake has real consequences. Refusing to see police brutality as part of a system and that the system needs to be changed means that the brutality will continue. The need to recognize racism as being systemic is one reason why the term white supremacy has been more useful than the term racism. Now, Dr. Welsing is dealing with it from the perspective that she gave to us in the Crest theory of color confrontation. She called it a psychogenetic theory, meaning that it was dealing with thoughts, and it was something that was in fact in the DNA of the people that she was identifying as white. But the common theme in both of these definitions is that both of these esteemed scholars identify white supremacy as a system. And I think that's been one of our problems in terms of how we confront it. Now, what we learned from our esteemed scholars, Brother Elder Neely Fuller and Dr. Welsing, they identified what they call 4 stages of white supremacy. And those four stages are establishment, maintenance, expansion, and refinement. And when a cycle of white supremacy will go through these phases, and then it will repeat. Okay, for example, chattel slavery. Okay, for us here in the United States that were brought to the United States, or perhaps maybe even transferred, from the Caribbean to the United States, or initially in British colonial North America, we see that chattel slavery was first established. Okay, then it was maintained. So it was established, it was maintained, as Dr. Martinez said, by a system of interlocking mechanisms. For example, laws that were passed, 1661, 1662, the Virginia House of Burgesses. We have the 1740 Negro Act in South Carolina as a result of the Stono Rebellion. They actually passed legislation that was named the Negro Act. And of course, we have within the United States Constitution, 1787, we have the three clauses that directly relate to the enslavement of African people. The 3/5 clause, which most people know about, the slave trade clause, which when they met, they decided that they would allow the transatlantic enslavement of Africans to continue, quote unquote, legally for 20 years till 1807. And then we had the fugitive slave clause, which said that any person, enslaved African liberating themselves, could be legally captured and returned to chattel slavery. So it's first established, it's maintained, then it's expanded to its maximum capacity. And perhaps the one of the key factors in the expansion, not only as they were taking land from the indigenous people, because without the land, there's no need for enslaved people to work. They wouldn't have anything to work until they had in fact stolen the land. But you had the invention of the cotton gin, which led to the rapid expansion. To actually, it led to cotton becoming the dominant product on the planet, at least in terms of the United States and Europe. The gin, which an African was involved in the actual production of, then of course led to what we call the internal or domestic movement of Africans from the mid-Atlantic colonies, which had primarily been focused on tobacco, into the southern colonies. We're still talking here about British colonial North America, and then the United States, into the southern states of Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, for example, places where they were producing cotton, and of course the brutal sugar plantations. So it's expanded to its maximum capacity. Then for a number of factors, which we don't have time to go into here from a historical perspective, we don't have time to go into all of the reasons why, but chattel slavery collapses. And so it appears that the cycle of white supremacy has come to an end, but actually it goes into the final stage of a particular cycle, which is called Dr. Wilson and Brother Fuller called refinement, where the white supremacy dynamic decides, okay, how do we regroup? How do we retool? How do we re-engineer? How do we remanufacture this system? Because it's still being driven by the mass-based philosophy of white supremacy, a sense of superiority, which they need to devalue other human beings in their minds in order to carry on these barbaric this terrorism that they take place in order to exploit and oppress people. And of course racial capitalism, which drives the economy, making massive profits off of free labor. So they said, okay, how do we continue this? So in the intermediate period, they passed some laws. These were the laws that were passed during the period of time we call Reconstruction. But the white supremacy dynamic is refining, retooling, and then engaging in barbaric violence in order to reestablish the next cycle, which comes about basically with the result of as a result of the Compromise of 1877. So the second cycle of white supremacy, American apartheid, is established, it's maintained, it's expanded. It comes under assault from the civil rights movement, human rights, voting rights. The system of legal apartheid is forced to capitulate. Once again, it looks like there's an opportunity perhaps for this country to live up to some form of justice. But no, what does the white supremacy dynamic say? No, we have to continue to maintain control because we need this system in order to continue to make enormous profits. You know, our very existence, our sense of being is based on our ability and our necessity to view these people as subhumans and to exploit them and to keep them under control. And then that led to the formation of what I'm calling the third cycle of white supremacy. Now, you know, nobody has really come up with a name that everybody can identify with in terms of the third cycle, but some of the major factors of it are psychological warfare, what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, and neo-colonialism here in the United States, and chaos. And so what I've done is identified about 11, let's see, is it 11? Yeah, 11 factors that are part of this third cycle of white supremacy. The time frames, you know, they're not necessarily cut in stone, but you could say probably beginning, you know, with the Nixon administration. Well, actually, if you want to go back just a little bit further, the late stages of the Johnson administration was a period of time when it looked like the country was moving towards some type of racial justice, but at the same time, you had the same forces, the white supremacy dynamic, at work undermining that process and reestablishing another cycle of white supremacy in order to maintain their prestige, their pride, and their profits. And so, you know, beginning with the assault on the black family, the erosion of the urban manufacturing base, the U.S. government war on the black liberation movement, which we discussed last week, Richard Nixon's war on drugs, the competition for the black mind and media assault on black consciousness to counter the effectiveness of the black cultural revolution. Then you had Ronald Reagan's expansion of the war on drugs, self-destruction became part of that factor. The new Jim Crow, mass racial incarceration, neo-colonialism, replacing white faces with black faces in high places, essentially holding office without holding power to positively impact the conditions of the people that they represent. We're talking here about black politicians, neo-colonial politicians, materialism, and the development of a bourgeois class consciousness. Remember, Du Bois had initially identified what he called a double consciousness, one African, one American. Actually, you know, he used the term Negro, but, you know, we can say today that what he was clearly talking about was an African consciousness and an American consciousness or Eurocentric consciousness. And he called this two warring ideals within one dark body. Okay. And so beginning, you know, in the 1960s, 1970s, we have this class consciousness seeping in. And so Du Bois' double consciousness, then it became a triple consciousness. And now when we add all of these other factors, you know, feminism, all of these gender issues, you know, our consciousness is even further fractured. So, you know, that's part of it. Confusion versus clarity, the impact of social media on thoughts and behavior. And the final one that I've identified, and this is a working list of factors, is the fear by white Americans of becoming a minority within this country, you know, which is directly related to what Dr. Wilson called fear of genetic annihilation. Now, obviously, I mean, you know, what I've gone over is really a crash course. I mean, you could go through each one of these factors, and each one of these factors of the 11 factors that I've identified so far as being major factors, each one of those could be, you know, a lecture, you know, in and of itself. But I just wanted to lay out, you know, some background and, you know, some thoughts as to why we are in the particular historical situation that we are in today.